When my son pointed at me in court and called me an old woman who wasted everything, I didn't cry. I just stared at his hand, the same hand I once held when he learned to walk. The courtroom was too quiet that morning. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the shuffle of papers, the soft click of someone's pen behind me. My heart, though, was louder than all of it. It beat like it was begging me to say something, anything. But I couldn't. My throat had turned to stone. Marcus, my only son, stood just a few feet away, his jaw tight, his voice cutting like glass. He wouldn't look at me directly, just at the lawyer beside him. His wife, Jasmine, sat in the row behind him, her arms folded neatly, her lips pressed into that sharp, practiced smile I had come to dread. "Your Honor," Marcus said, pointing in my direction, "that woman refuses to hand over the property. She wastes everything my father and I worked for. She doesn't deserve it." I didn't move. Not when his words sliced through the silence, not when I heard people gasp, not even when my lawyer gently placed her hand on mine to steady me. Because in that moment, I wasn't in that courtroom anymore. I was back in my kitchen, 25 years earlier, when Marcus still called me Mama and kissed my cheek every morning before school. The smell of pancakes, the sound of his laughter, the sunlight catching his curls, that's what I saw. Not this stranger standing before a judge. But that morning, I also realized something deeper. Betrayal doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes dressed in suits and silence. And sometimes it looks like your own child. I raised Marcus on my own after his father passed. James was a kind man, gentle, quiet, the kind who could fix a broken fence or a broken heart with the same patience. When cancer took him, Marcus was just 12. The night James died, Marcus slept in my lap, holding my hand so tightly that my fingers went numb. I promised him right there, through tears and the sound of rain hitting our roof, that I would never let him fall. And I kept that promise. I worked 2 jobs, one at the library during the day and one cleaning offices at night. I sold James's old truck, and when money was tight, I sold my wedding ring too. We made it through every winter, every bill, every empty fridge. Marcus grew into a bright young man. He was ambitious, confident, maybe too confident sometimes. He dreamed of starting his own company, said he'd make enough money to buy me a house by the ocean one day. I used to smile and tell him, "Child, I'm happy just to have you." But dreams cost money. So, when he came to me at 28 with a plan for a business, a construction company with a few friends, I didn't hesitate. I mortgaged my house. I handed him my savings, all $28,000 of it, even the small inheritance James had left me. He hugged me so tightly that night I could barely breathe. "Mama, I'll make you proud," he whispered. "You'll see. You won't have to worry about anything again." And I believed him. Because that's what mothers do, we believe, even when the math doesn't add up, even when our hearts whisper, "Be careful." The business took off faster than I imagined. Suddenly, Marcus was traveling, buying new suits, upgrading his car. He moved out, bought a big house on the other side of town, and within a year, he introduced me to Jasmine. She was beautiful, elegant, sharp, and confident. But from the first handshake, I felt something cold under her smile. She didn't call me Ma or Mrs. Robinson, just Margaret. Her perfume was expensive, her tone polite but distant, like she was meeting someone she'd already decided didn't matter. Still, I tried. I brought homemade pies when I visited, helped fold laundry, even ironed Marcus's shirts when they were too busy. But every time I stepped into their house, I felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Once, while I was washing dishes, I overheard her whispering to Marcus, "She's always here. You need to set boundaries. We're married now." He didn't defend me. He just sighed and said, "She means well." It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me quiet. A few months later, Marcus suggested I transfer the house deed to his name, for tax purposes, he said. "It'll make things easier if anything happens to you." I laughed it off at first. "Boy, I'm not dying anytime soon." He smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "I just want to take care of you, Mama." So, I trusted him again. I went down to the notary's office, signed the papers he prepared, and handed him everything. I didn't realize, in that moment, that I was giving away more than a house. I was handing over every piece of security I had left. But life went on. Until the day I came home from the grocery store and found a letter on my porch, a formal notice that I was being asked to vacate the property within 60 days. My own house. My name wasn't on the deed anymore. I remember sitting on those wooden steps, the wind cutting through my sweater, reading the letter over and over like it might change if I looked long enough. Marcus didn't answer his phone that day. And for the first time in my life, I didn't call twice. That's how we ended up in court 6 months later. He said I refused to leave his house. I said I had nowhere else to go. His wife sat behind him, her hand resting proudly on his shoulder like a queen watching her servant do her bidding. When he pointed at me and said those words, "That old lady wastes everything she doesn't deserve," something inside me broke, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't the sound of heartbreak. It was the sound of realization. My son wasn't the man I raised anymore. And maybe that was my fault. After that court hearing, I went home to a place that no longer felt like mine. The windows still caught the same evening light, the air still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle I kept on the counter, but everything felt smaller, quieter, colder. The kind of quiet that hums in your bones. I sat at the kitchen table for hours that night, staring at the wall clock. Each tick reminded me of how long it had been since Marcus last called me just to say, "Hi, Mama." I thought of all the times I'd packed his lunch, saved his favorite pie for later, left the porch light on until he came home. I wondered when that light started meaning nothing to him. But a mother's heart doesn't stop asking why. It keeps searching for reason, even when there isn't one. 2 days after court, I decided to visit Marcus at his office. I'd told myself it was just a talk, but deep down I needed to see if there was still a trace of my son somewhere behind those proud, angry eyes. The receptionist smiled politely when I walked in, but her eyes shifted when I said my name. "He's in a meeting," she murmured, almost too softly. "You can wait if you'd like." I waited. An hour passed. Then another. The people coming in and out looked at me like I was lost. When Marcus finally appeared, his face changed the moment he saw me. The easy smile he had for his colleagues vanished. "Mama, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone clipped. "I just wanted to talk," I said quietly. "Not about court. Just about us." He sighed. "You shouldn't come here unannounced. It's not a good look." I blinked at him, unsure if I'd heard right. Not a good look? For a moment, the boy I raised flashed through my mind, the one who used to grab my hand when he was scared, who'd beg me to stay until he fell asleep. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man more concerned with appearances than truth. I smiled faintly and said, "I'm still your mother, Marcus." Not a headline. He didn't answer. He just looked away, and in that silence, I saw something, a flicker of guilt maybe, but it passed as quickly as it came. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his wife smirk in that courtroom, the way she adjusted her pearls when I walked by, as if the air around me dirted them. Something about her had always felt wrong, rehearsed, too smooth. So the next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went digging. Not for revenge. Not even for justice. Just for truth. I started with the mortgage papers I'd signed years ago. They were neatly tucked in a folder inside my old desk drawer. I flipped through them slowly, reading every line, every signature. My name was there, Margaret Robinson, but something caught my eye. The witness signature wasn't the same as the one I remembered. It wasn't the notary who'd been there that day. It was someone named E. Carter. My stomach dropped. That wasn't who notarized my papers. I took the documents to the local county office, pretending I just needed to update my records. The clerk, an older man with kind eyes, looked them over carefully. He frowned and said, "Ma'am, this notarization doesn't match our records. This file's been altered." Altered. The word echoed in my chest like thunder in an empty room. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone had rewritten my trust. Later that week, I saw Jasmine at the grocery store. She was standing by the wine section, dressed in a cream coat, talking loudly on her phone. I tried to walk past quietly, but she saw me. Her smile was wide, too wide. "Well, if it isn't Margaret," she said, sliding her phone into her purse. How are you holding up? Court must have been hard. It was, I said softly. You seem fine though. She chuckled. You know, we all have to adjust to new realities. Marcus is just doing what's best for the family. The family. She said it like I wasn't part of it. I looked her dead in the eye. Jasmine, you have what you wanted. But let me tell you something, truth has a funny way of coming back around. Her lips tightened. She picked up a bottle of wine and turned away. But I saw it, the flicker of unease in her eyes. She knew something. That night, I called a friend from church, Evelyn, who used to work at a legal office before she retired. I told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, Margaret, baby, bring me those papers tomorrow. We'll look through them together. The next afternoon, we spread them out on her kitchen table. Evelyn put on her reading glasses, traced the signatures, and muttered under her breath. See this? The property transfer was filed twice. Once when you signed, and again 3 months later. That's when the new notary's name appeared. That's illegal. My hands trembled. You mean, they changed it after I signed? Evelyn looked at me sadly. They did more than that, honey. They made it look like you gifted the property. Gifted. As if all those years of sacrifice, love, and sweat were just something I gave away. I sat back in my chair, numb. I could hear the faint hum of Evelyn's fridge, the clock ticking on her wall, the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Everything felt heavy, my body, my breath, my faith. Finally, I whispered, why would my own son let this happen? Evelyn reached across the table and took my hand. Sometimes, people lose their way, Margaret. But it doesn't mean you can't find yours. That night, I didn't cry. Not once. I just stared out the window, watching the moonlight spill across the lawn. Somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. For months, I'd been quiet, hoping Marcus would wake up and realize what was happening. But now I knew silence had only made me smaller. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to stand up. And this time, I wasn't doing it for his love. I was doing it for my dignity. The morning after I found out the papers were forged, I woke before dawn. The house was still, too still, the way a place feels when it's been holding its breath too long. I made myself a cup of tea, but the steam rising from it felt like smoke from something burning inside me. For years, I'd told myself that Marcus was just busy. That Jasmine's coldness was just nerves, or pride, or maybe insecurity. But sitting there, watching the sunlight creep across my table, a table I bought the year Marcus graduated college, I realized the truth I'd been afraid to say out loud. My son had chosen her over me. And together, they had rewritten my life as if it were a bad chapter in their story. Evelyn helped me find a lawyer, not one of those sharp-talking men who treated old women like petty cases, but a woman named Lorraine who listened. She didn't interrupt me once as I told her everything, from Marcus's first car to the day he shouted those words in court. When I finished, Lorraine leaned back and said quietly, Mrs. Robinson, what they did is called fraudulent transfer. It's serious. But I need you to understand, cases like this are ugly. Family turns into witnesses. Are you ready for that? I thought about Marcus as a boy, sitting at our old wooden table doing his homework, his tongue sticking out when he wrote too fast. I thought about how he used to run to me after every scraped knee. And I said, yes, I'm ready. That week, Lorraine filed the motion. Within days, Marcus and Jasmine were served with notice. I expected a call, maybe even an apology. But what I got instead was silence. Then, a few days later, a message. Marcus, you really want to do this? After everything I've done for you? I stared at my phone for a long time before replying. Me? You forged my signature, Marcus. You lied. You took what wasn't yours. There were 3 dots for a moment, typing, stopping, typing again, then nothing. That silence said more than any word could. A week later, I saw them again. Lorraine had arranged a mediation session before the next court date, a chance to settle privately. I wore my best gray shawl, the one Marcus gave me on Mother's Day years ago. I wanted to remind him of who I still was, his mother. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Marcus sat on one side of the table, tapping his pen against his folder. Jasmine was beside him, perfectly poised, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if to remind him who he belonged to now. Lorraine leaned toward me and whispered, "Just tell the truth. Let them reveal themselves." The mediator started. "We're here to discuss the property dispute between Mrs. Robinson and her son, Mr. Robinson." Before he could finish, Jasmine interrupted. "Let's be clear, the property was a gift. Margaret signed it willingly." I turned my head slowly toward her. "A gift? That's what you call it when someone tricks an old woman into signing her home away." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but didn't look at me. "Mom," he said, "Jasmine handled the paperwork. She thought it was best. You said you trusted us." "I did trust you," I said, my voice trembling. "That's why I didn't read every word. That's why I signed. Because I believed my son wouldn't hurt me." For a moment, the room went silent. Even the air felt heavy. Then Jasmine leaned forward, her smile tight. "Maybe if you'd managed your finances better, Marcus wouldn't have had to take responsibility." I stared at her, really stared. And for the first time, I saw what lay behind her calm. Fear. Fear of losing control, of losing what she thought she'd already won. I took a deep breath. "You may own a piece of paper, Jasmine. But you'll never own my son's soul, not the part one raised." Marcus's jaw clenched. "This isn't about souls, Mom. It's about property. About what's fair." "Fair?" I whispered. "You pointed at me in court and called me wasteful. You took the roof I built for you and you call that fair." He looked down. That's when I realized guilt was already cracking his armor. When the mediation ended, nothing was resolved. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't begging for love, I was demanding truth. That evening, Lorraine called. "Mrs. Robinson, you might want to sit down. We found something." She explained that Jasmine had taken out a personal loan using the property as collateral before they filed the false transfer. "If we present this, it proves intent to defraud," she said. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "So that's why they wanted the house?" "Yes," Lorraine said softly. "They were trying to cover their debts." The room seemed to spin. All those family dinners, those polite smiles, those "we're just managing finances" excuses, it had all been part of a plan. And Marcus, my sweet boy, had stood by and let it happen. That night, I walked out onto the porch. The air was cool, the crickets soft in the distance. I thought of my husband, gone these 20 years. How proud he'd been of Marcus. Did we raise him wrong? I whispered into the dark. Did I love him too much? The stars didn't answer, but something inside me did. No, love isn't wrong, but forgetting to protect yourself in the name of love is. I stood there until the first light touched the sky, feeling the weight of both loss and clarity. For the first time in years, I felt my spine straighten, not from anger, but from resolve. I would go back to that courtroom. I would face my son again. And this time, I would not be silent. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. When I walked in that morning, I wasn't the same woman who had sat there weeks ago, trembling as my son pointed at me. This time, my hands were steady. My lawyer, Lorraine, carried the folder with all our evidence, but the real strength I brought wasn't in those papers, it was in my heart. Marcus and Jasmine were already seated at their table. She was dressed sharp as ever, her lips painted that same shade of confidence she always wore like armor. Marcus avoided my eyes. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the kind that comes from guilt trying to sit still. Lorraine leaned close and whispered, "Today, we show the judge everything. No more fear." I nodded. No more silence either. When the judge called our case, I stood. My name, Margaret Robinson, echoed through that room like a prayer and a wound at the same time. Lorraine began calmly, presenting the documents, my original deed, the forgery report, the loan papers Jasmine had filed using my home as collateral. Each one placed neatly in front of the judge like steps on a staircase leading to the truth. When she was done, the judge turned to Marcus's side. "Do you have a response?" Jasmine rose before Marcus could. "Your Honor," she began, voice sweet but sharp, "this is simply a misunderstanding between family. Mrs. Robinson signed the deed willingly. Perhaps she doesn't remember." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Robinson, may I ask your age?" 67, Your Honor, I replied. He nodded. And were you of sound mind and health when this document was signed? I was, I said, my voice clear. But trust can blind even the healthiest eyes. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Jasmine's face twitched, just slightly. Then came the moment Lorraine had prepared for. Your Honor, may I request the court to admit Exhibit 7, a recorded voicemail left by Mr. Robinson to Mrs. Robinson, dated 3 days before the property transfer? The judge nodded. Proceed. Lorraine pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. Mom, I know you're tired of paperwork, but just sign what Jasmine brings. It's to make things easier for taxes, okay? You don't need to read it. Just trust us. There was a pause, my voice followed, gentle and trusting. Of course, baby. I trust you. When the audio ended, you could have heard a pin drop. The judge turned slowly toward Marcus. Mr. Robinson, did you knowingly misrepresent the nature of these documents to your mother? Marcus's face went pale. I was trying to help with the business. Answer the question. He swallowed hard. Yes, Your Honor. I knew. I didn't breathe. Not for a moment. Hearing him admit it, the boy I'd carried, the man I'd built my life around, it was like watching a mirror crack down the middle. Jasmine's hand shot out, gripping his arm. Marcus, she hissed. Don't say another word. But the judge raised a hand. That's enough, Mrs. Robinson. You'll have your chance to speak. Lorraine stood tall. Your Honor, the evidence shows intent to defraud, emotional coercion, and elder exploitation. My client only wants one thing, the return of her home and her peace. When the judge recessed, I walked out into the hallway. My legs felt heavy, but my chest lighter than it had in months. Marcus followed me out. Mom, he said softly. I didn't turn right away. I wanted him to feel the silence he'd left me with all these years. Why, Marcus? I finally asked. Why did you do it? He ran a hand through his hair. Jasmine said it was temporary. That we'd give it back once the business took off. I didn't think. That's the problem, I interrupted. You didn't think. You just obeyed. You forgot who taught you to stand up straight, who worked double shifts so you could go to college, who kept the light on when you wanted to quit. You forgot your mother. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the boy he used to be flicker behind those tired eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. I was scared. Scared people don't lie, Marcus, I said quietly. Cowards do. The second half of the hearing was almost silent. The evidence spoke louder than any words could. When the judge finally ruled, I felt my heart stop. The court finds the property transfer fraudulent and hereby restores ownership to Mrs. Margaret Robinson. Furthermore, the actions of the defendants warrant further review for financial misconduct. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and whispered, thank you. Lorraine squeezed my hand. You did it, she said. No, I whispered back. Truth did. Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray but somehow beautiful. Jasmine stormed past without a word, her heels clicking hard against the pavement. Marcus followed, his shoulders slumped. He paused just before the steps. Mom, he said, voice small, I don't expect you to forgive me. I looked at him, this man who was still somehow my child. I will, I said softly one day. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust. That's something you'll have to earn, brick by brick. He nodded, eyes glistening, then turned and walked away. That night, I unlocked my front door, and stepped back inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender again, the way it used to when peace still lived there. I sat on the couch, ran my hand over the armrest, and let out a breath I'd been holding for years. There was no victory in my heart, only stillness. Because winning doesn't erase what was lost. But it does remind you who you are and who you'll never let yourself become. Word travels fast in small towns, faster than forgiveness, slower than shame. By the next morning, everyone from my church ladies to the postman knew what had happened in that courtroom. People who used to whisper behind my back, calling me that poor old woman who lost her house, now looked at me with something different in their eyes. Respect. Maybe even pride. But pride never sat easy with me. It's heavy, and I'd carried enough weight already. I woke up that morning to the soft chime of the clock on my mantel. The same clock my late husband, Robert, bought when Marcus was born. It had stopped ticking during the months I was forced out of my own home, maybe out of grief, maybe out of protest. But that morning, it ticked again. I don't know why, but it did. I made tea. Real tea, not the kind you drink to pass time, but the kind you make when you've survived something. Jasmine, vanilla, and a pinch of hope. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. It was Sister Helen, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She's been around since Marcus was little, always bringing sweet potato pie during hard times. She held one now, warm in her hands. "Heard the news," she said, smiling softly. "Didn't I tell you? Truth might take her time, but she always shows up." I let out a small laugh. "She sure does, but she makes you wait until your knees ache." Helen stepped inside, looking around the house. "Feels different in here," she said. "Like peace finally came home." I nodded. It did. But it came with a few cracks. Later that evening, I went to church for the first time in months. I'd been avoiding it, not because of God, but because of the pity in people's eyes. But this time, when I walked in, folks didn't pity me. They stood up. Some clapped, some hugged me. Pastor Daniel smiled from the pulpit. "Welcome home, Sister Margaret," he said warmly. "The Lord sure put his hand on your justice." I smiled, but inside I whispered, "No, Pastor. He put his hand on my patience." During service, I sat quietly in my usual spot, third pew from the back, next to the stained glass window with the dove. As the choir sang, I closed my eyes. The music felt heavier now, filled with meaning I hadn't noticed before. When service ended, a few women came up to me, mothers mostly. Some older, some younger. One of them, Miss Carla, said, "I saw my own son in yours, Miss Margaret." Sometimes they forget who raised them. But you reminded us all love doesn't mean letting people walk over you. Her words hit deep. Because that's exactly what I had learned, the hardest way possible. The next day, Marcus came by. Alone. No Jasmine, no fancy car. Just him, wearing an old jacket I hadn't seen in years, looking like the boy who used to run home after basketball practice. He stood on my porch for a while before knocking. I opened the door, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, but not angry. Just sad. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. "You don't need to ask, Marcus. It's still your home, at least, the part that lives in my heart." We sat in the kitchen. The same one where I'd taught him how to pour cereal without spilling milk, where I'd waited for him on prom night, where he once told me I was his hero. He took a deep breath. "I don't expect you to ever trust me again. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, not because I got caught, but because I see now what I did." I looked at him, searching his face for the boy I raised. "You know what hurt the most?" I asked. "It wasn't losing the house. It was hearing you say those words in court. That old lady wastes everything she doesn't deserve." "Marcus, that broke something inside me." He lowered his head. I was angry. "Jasmine made me think you were holding us back, that you didn't believe in me." I sighed. "Son, believing in you was never the problem. I just didn't want to lose myself believing lies." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I'm trying to fix it, Mom. I left Jasmine. I'm starting over. I just hope, one day, you'll let me earn your trust again." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "You start by showing up, Marcus. Not with promises, with presence." He nodded again, gripping my hand gently. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a beginning, not of what was, but of what could be. In the following weeks, the story spread through town, not as gossip, but as a lesson. At the grocery store, women would stop me to say, "I saw what you went through. You gave us courage." Even the young folks whispered my name like I was someone who'd survived a storm, and maybe I had. But I didn't feel like a hero. Just a mother who'd finally learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's surrender. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus came by again. This time, he brought something small, a repaired porcelain figurine of a mother and child I'd once owned. It had broken years ago, and I'd never thrown it away. "I fixed it," he said quietly, setting it on the table. The cracks were still visible, faint lines of gold where glue had filled the breaks. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled faintly. They call it kintsugi in Japan. The art of mending with gold. They say the cracks become part of the story, not something to hide. I looked at him, then at the figurine. Then I guess we're both learning to live with gold in our cracks. That night, I sat by my window, tea in hand, and watched the streetlights flicker on. The house was quiet again, not empty, just peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Because dignity, once lost, can be rebuilt. And sometimes, it shines even brighter through the breaks. I sighed. Son, believing in you was never the problem. I just didn't want to lose myself believing lies. He nodded, tears filling his eyes. I'm trying to fix it, Mom. I left Jasmine. I'm starting over. I just hope, one day, you'll let me earn your trust again. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. You start by showing up, Marcus. Not with promises, with presence. He nodded again, gripping my hand gently. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a beginning, not of what was, but of what could be. In the following weeks, the story spread through town, not as gossip, but as a lesson. At the grocery store, women would stop me to say, I saw what you went through. You gave us courage. Even the young folks whispered my name like I was someone who'd survived a storm, and maybe I had. But I didn't feel like a hero. Just a mother who'd finally learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's surrender. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus came by again. This time, he brought something small, a repaired porcelain figurine of a mother and child I'd once owned. It had broken years ago, and I'd never thrown it away. I fixed it, he said quietly, setting it on the table. The cracks were still visible, faint lines of gold where glue had filled the breaks. It's beautiful, I whispered. He smiled faintly. They call it kintsugi in Japan. The art of mending with gold. They say the cracks become part of the story, not something to hide. I looked at him, then at the figurine. Then I guess we're both learning to live with gold in our cracks. That night, I sat by my window, tea in hand, and watched the streetlights flicker on. The house was quiet again, not empty, just peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Because dignity, once lost, can be rebuilt. And sometimes, it shines even brighter through the breaks. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. The envelope smelled faintly of old cologne, the kind Robert used to wear. For a moment, my hands trembled, thinking maybe it was from Marcus. But it wasn't. It was from Jasmine. Her words were short, careful, almost rehearsed. Mrs. Walker. I know I can't undo what I've done. I wanted more than I deserved, and I used Marcus to get it. I see now that I broke something sacred. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. Jasmine. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. The old me might have ripped it up, but I didn't. I folded it neatly, tucked it inside my Bible, not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. People change, but consequences don't vanish. One Sunday, Marcus came with me to church. He didn't sit in the back like before, he sat beside me. When Pastor Daniel began the sermon on grace, I saw my son close his eyes, like the word itself was too heavy to look at. After the service, he said, Mom, I've been offered a job in another town. It's small, but honest work. I think I need a new start. I nodded slowly. You go, Marcus. Start fresh. Just remember, don't build your house on someone else's pain. He hugged me tight, and for the first time in years, I felt his arms around me the way they used to be, safe, sincere, home. That night, as I washed the dishes, I noticed the cracks in one of my plates. I almost threw it away, but then I remembered the little figurine Marcus had mended with gold. So instead, I dried it gently, set it back on the shelf, and whispered, not everything broken needs replacing. The seasons changed. Leaves turned golden, then fell. I planted roses in the front yard, deep red ones, like Robert used to love. The first bloom came on a quiet morning when the world smelled of rain and forgiveness. As I knelt down to touch it, I realized this house, this life, even with all its scars, was still mine. I'd lost a son to pride, then found a man through repentance. I'd been humiliated in public, then honored in truth. And through it all, I'd learned something simple but profound. You can't stop people from betraying you, but you can stop them from breaking you. These days, I sit by my window in the evenings, cup of tea in hand, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Sometimes, I hear laughter from across the street, families eating dinner, children chasing fireflies, and I smile. Because even after all the noise, all the shame, all the heartbreak, I still found peace in the quiet. The kind of peace that doesn't need apologies, just acceptance. When people ask me now how I survived losing everything, I tell them the truth. I didn't lose everything. I just lost what wasn't meant to stay. You know, when I stood in that courtroom, watching my own son raise his hand against me with words sharper than any knife, I thought my story was ending. But now, looking back, I see that was just the middle, the breaking point before the light found its way in. Sometimes, life takes everything from you just to show you what was never yours to begin with. My house, my pride, even my son's loyalty, I thought they defined me. But in the end, it wasn't the loss that changed me. It was what I did after. I learned to stand again, not out of anger, but out of faith. Faith that truth always finds its way home. Faith that even the deepest scars can bloom into wisdom. And, maybe, faith that forgiveness isn't about saying they were right. It's about choosing peace over pain. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you raised, loved, or trusted with your heart, I want you to remember this. You are not broken. You are just being reshaped. Every storm you survive writes a new kind of strength inside you, one you won't even realize you have until you're standing alone and still smiling. That's where I am now, smiling in my quiet kitchen, watching the light hit the same old plate that once shattered across my floor. It's cracked, yes, but it's still holding together. Just like me. So I'll leave you with this, my dear listener. What would you do if the person you loved most stood against you in front of the world? Would you fight, or would you let the truth speak for itself? Tell me in the comments below, and if my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share it. Because you never know who might need to hear that it's never too late to start again.